My mother did not recoil as the boardroom door's glass shook behind her. I didn't either. The rusted compass that Dad gave me the day I left for college was swinging softly at my wrist as the sunlight flooded across the polished floor and caught the edge of my travel-worn blazer. "To get your bearings," he said. It had been years since I last looked at it. As I stood across from the woman who taught me to judge my value in silence, it now hung like a witness. "Clara, why are you here?" As usual, her voice was clipped and calm as she asked. My entire name was not used by her. Only Clara, not Clarissa. No, dear. Nothing that would indicate she recalled that I used to live here. I took a breath. Slow. Managed. The compass's brass felt chilly against my flesh. "I came to get what's rightfully mine." The corner of her mouth pulled in a tiny, piercing smile. "Your belongings have already been sent." I'm not referring to clothing. I caught the quiver of irritation that resided just beneath her flawless face, even though her brows hardly moved. My mother had perfected the art of making you feel crazy while still looking normal. She could give me a look that would make me go crazy for days. However, it is no longer the case. The huge wood conference table behind her was where Mom and my brother Oliver used to have their renowned legacy lunches, which I hadn't been invited to in 15 years. She stated calmly, "You ought to have remained in San Francisco. I'd heard that you were something, mentoring small business therapy." I ignored the insult. "I help people who were silenced rebuild their voice from scratch," I remarked. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she crossed her arms, saying, "Charming. So are you currently doing this in the middle of my office, taking back your voice? It is no longer your office." She was moved by that. She hardly tensed, but I could see it. I left a piece of folded paper on the table. Like a stone on ice, it slid in her direction. She took it up. She glanced at the first line. "Notification of transfer of ownership for Borealis House Foundation." "It's not possible," she stated bluntly. "It's not impossible," I said. "Just past due," she raised her head. "This was forged by you." I played the audio file while tapping my phone. "As the executor of Robert Hemsworth's estate, I certify that in accordance with the 2011 revision to the Founding Trust, Clarissa Hemsworth is the legitimate heir to the controlling interest in Borealis House." I stopped it. 3 years prior to his passing, Dad made the adjustment. You were aware. You simply didn't tell me. There was a fleeting glimpse of something genuine in her face. Not remorse. Something more ancient. Indignation masquerading as fear. She growled. "That document was sealed. Up until now," she squinted. "You believe you have power because of this. I surveyed the space. All of the men except for her are depicted in the portraits on the wall. The mother who eliminated me with one hand while teaching Sunday school with the other." "No," I muttered. "However, it tells me the truth. And that's sufficient." I gently placed the compass on the table between us after taking it from my wrist. "You once informed me that I was lost. The fact that I needed a mentor. I simply needed to stop letting you draw the map, it turns out. After that, I left. I used to stand in the same hallway waiting to be allowed inside, out into the crisp Vermont air which smelled of pine frost, and something else past the receptionist who used to refer to me as the quiet Hemsworth girl, Liberty. But remembrance is a prerequisite for freedom, and mine was farther back than she had ever thought. My high school graduation was the last time my mother gave me a hug without considering the optics. Not the ceremony, but the morning of it when I used a cheap iron to curl my hair and burned my hand. "Red skin looks tacky in photos," she said, pressing ice into my palm rather than out of concern. She gave the camera a smile. I tightened my jaw. The first indication ought to have been that. However, we are taught to interpret brutality as care and indifference as discipline. This is especially true for daughters like me who fade into doorframes and respond, "It's fine," before anyone asks. You will become proficient at swallowing it if your silence brings serenity. Living in Hemsworth as a child was like being in a museum that my mother had put together. Each youngster had a role, each hallway a bloodline, and each vase a narrative. My older brother Oliver, who was charming, calculating, and coached like a prize show dog, was the heir apparent. My younger sister Mara was the artist. She was untamed but tolerant, a free spirit, with enough beauty to make up for her shortcomings. Me, I was steady. This was code meaning invisibility. Mom used to remark, "You are the glue. You prevent this family from disintegrating." However, glue is not framed, it is utilized. When Dad was still living, he could see it in the way he slipped me library books rather than jewelry, and the silent slant of his gaze when I offered to assist clean up after gatherings. He would say things like, "Still water runs deep, Clary," as we sat on the back porch in the winter steam flowing from our mugs. "Don't let them think you're not there." In the fall of my 25th birthday, he passed away. A stroke, quick and harsh. Wearing a black coat that was 2 sizes too big and anguish that I couldn't zip up tight enough, I flew home for the funeral while I was wrapping up graduate school. The house was already bustling with family members, florists, and donors who had come to admire my mother's poise rather than to grieve. "Elegant even now," they remarked. My attempt was to read a eulogy. Halfway through, my voice broke. "I've got it," Mara said in a whisper as she took over the microphone. She didn't read what I said. She created her own about how her father said she lighted up the room and that he believed in her work. Oliver also spoke about leadership and legacy, about continuing Dad's work at Borealis House, the nonprofit organization he established to support victims of violence and harassment at work. The calm girl in the rear went unnoticed. Nobody brought up the fact that I was the sole volunteer present. I went outside to the porch where Dad and I used to sit after the service. The mug remained in place, chilly, ignored. On my keychain, the compass he had given me for college was still pointed north despite being cracked and corroded. I asked Mom whether Dad had left anything for me in the kitchen that evening. She drank her tea without looking up. She remarked, "You've always been the strong one. Items are not necessary for you." I needed to be acknowledged. I received a request to gather his books before to the estate sale. In splinters, the years went by. The West Coast is where I now reside. Made a modest living in San Francisco. Dad used to fight for nonprofit organizations in difficulty, and I now work as a consultant for them. I developed trauma-informed techniques learnt to empathize with others' suffering, and assisted women in getting back on their feet. The work was done quietly, not sexy. However, it was significant. I sent Mom pictures of my new flat. She never answered. I sent Mara birthday cards. She once uploaded a photo of one that was edited to just display the stamp. I called Oliver, but he never picked up. They said that I was out west doing her thing, as if I had turned into a psychic healer or a backpacker. The only reason I knew they continued to mention me was when Hannah, a college buddy, unexpectedly messaged me one day. "Hey, you were mentioned in the program for your sister's fundraising gala. It has to do with estranged siblings, and how Mara overcame them to achieve success." "What's that about?" I choked on my own tea because I was laughing so hard. Then I started crying. After that, I stopped answering messages from family groups. They were unaware, but the final straw arrived in silence. The afternoon was a Thursday. After finishing a training session for an Oakland domestic violence shelter, I received a notification that read, "Hemsworth Legacy Feature, Forbes Philanthropy." The timeless and polished face of my mother gazed back at me. Her vision was lauded in the article. Her kids, her capacity to forge connections despite traumatic family divisions. Oliver was quoted as saying, "Dad would be proud. The torch has been borne by us. We're proof that resilience is a choice." Mara added, "There was no mention of Clara. Not a shadow at all." I browsed over the picture galleries. In front of the donor wall of the Borealis house stood the photo of the Hemsworth siblings. 3 individuals. That wall was familiar to me. It was painted with my help. One of the bricks in the foundation garden had been etched with my name. C made an anonymous donation. It said, Hemsworth. However, anonymity wasn't that. Erasure was that. I groped for the compass once more at that point. I dropped it on a driveway slippery with spring rain and held it in my hand, my thumb grazing the tiny scratch on the bottom, the one I made the day Dad handed it to me. It was still functional, still pointing north, and I came to a realization for the first time in years. I wasn't lost. They simply stopped trying to find me. However, that was going to change. Not angry, not with a spectacle, but with the truth. I then purchased a one-way ticket home. I was standing in Borealis House's side garden, looking at a plaque that I hadn't seen in more than 10 years, 3 weeks after that story was published. Where silence ends, hope begins. My father loved that phrase the most. When I was 16, I had scribbled it in ink on the back of a napkin. He had it carved in bronze because he loved it so much, and he put it next to the fountain under the cherry blossom tree. It was never his claim to be mine. He was not required to. I recalled his expression when they fitted it. Now, though, under it a fresh plaque appeared. Sleeker. More vivid. The Hemsworth Vision Unity is the foundation of legacy. Both Oliver and Camille Hemsworth signed it. Camille. Mom. I wondered how many years of silence it had taken for them to recreate that quote, while I stood there, my fingers curled around the handle of the small leather binder in my tote bag. Write me again. Across the courtyard, I was spotted by a woman wearing gardening gloves and wearing a name badge that said Gloria, admin volunteer. She appeared somewhat familiar, perhaps, from the previous staff when I worked as a college intern. Are you trying to find someone? She brushed dirt from her knees and inquired. I paused. This is where I used to work. Simply going to. Ah. Her expression softened. It is no longer the same location. No, I replied. It isn't. Gloria's head cocked. I used to know someone who looks like you. Wasn't that you, Clarissa? I grinned. I still am. Her gaze expanded. Oh, honey, they said that you had relocated to Bali or something. Close, I answered. Oakland, she laughed. That family is the only one who thinks California is a place of spiritual exile. We chuckled. It was my first genuine laugh in weeks. The tightness in my chest was sufficiently loosened. You wouldn't have access to donor archives, would you? I inquired gently. Between around 2010 and 2012, she arched an eyebrow. Officially, no. However, I never deleted the files from the back study. It is no longer used by anyone. Oliver now makes advantage of the cloud, but you'll require a code. She winked. Try 11/25, which is your father's birthday. A few of us can recall. I blinked. I'm grateful. As if it were nothing, she waved me away. However, it was crucial. The smell of pine oil and dust filled the old study. Slowly, I turned the lights on. Books that my father used to annotate in blue pen adorned the walls. As though he had just gone out for tea and forgotten to come back, one of his old cardigans was left hanging on the back of the desk chair. The access code was entered by me. The cabinet opened with a click. 3 file boxes were inside, clearly marked, a correspondence with Donors B amendments to legacy trusts. C drafts of estate transfers. I opened box B. Finding what I didn't realize I was looking for required 30 minutes of page flipping and cross-referencing names. An addendum dated August 2nd, 2011 notarized, the signature of my father, his attorneys, observed at the time by the secretary of the board. It said that upon his passing, Clarissa J. Hemsworth would receive his 51% controlling stake in Borealis House directly, rather than through the trustee group, which had hitherto gone to my mother. My mouth was dry as I gazed at it. That 51% wasn't merely a token amount. Operational authority was what it meant. It was a sign of power. It meant the last word. However, I never received the call. The documents were never seen, since someone ensured that I didn't. I looked over the remainder of the file. It was there. 3 months after my father's passing, Camille Hemsworth wrote a letter to the lawyer. Please wait for more instructions before sharing the amendment with Clarissa per our talk. She is currently estranged and emotionally unstable. I reclined in the leather chair covered in dust. Although my mother signed the letter, Oliver forwarded it, according to the email trail that is detailed below. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and took a picture, then another, next the entire file. All of a sudden, there was no miscommunication during the previous 10 years of distance. The orchestration was the cause. They hadn't simply abandoned me. They exerted pressure, and they shut the door behind me after I didn't argue. I silently uploaded my findings to a new folder on my Google Drive over the following hour. Borealis Reclaim is the label. After that, I took a step that I hadn't taken in over a decade. I clicked on my dad's email. The password remained valid. My heart nearly stopped. The inbox remained intact despite being archived. He and the board exchanged a lot of emails, memories, making plans, techniques. Additionally, one that was sent to me and was dated only a week prior to his stroke was still tagged as unread. Subject, "It's yours when you're ready." I took it open. Clary, I am aware that they have made you feel inferior. I also see it. I regret that I haven't always stood up the way I ought to have. However, the destiny of Borealis rests with the person who comprehends its purpose, which was impact rather than image. You are that. The documentation is ready when you are. Let them express themselves. In the quiet, I have witnessed your strength. It was never intended for the compass to guide you back to them. It served as a reminder that you could always lead yourself. Love, Father. I refrained from crying. I simply muttered, "I'm ready now." Then pressed the print button. When I entered, the board meeting had already started. Oliver, wearing the same blue blazer he had been wearing in the Forbes spread, led the 8 members around the new slick conference table in Borealis House. They were all well-groomed and nodding as he led them through a PowerPoint on expanding digital reach, the one that gave him the appearance of someone who belonged in politics rather than charity. At first he didn't notice me, not one of them did, until my throat cleared. Mid-slide, the projector screen froze. Heads turned one by one. As if someone had opened a window in the dead of winter, the air changed. Clary Oliver's voice dropped an octave as he blinked. "What are you?" I said calmly. "I'm here for the motion item. Agenda Point 7, clarification of ownership of the controlling interest." The room froze. Oliver looked over at the chairwoman, Meredith Crane, a retired judge I knew from my adolescence. When I was too frightened to sing my solo at a holiday benefit, she once allowed me to sit on her lap. Her eyebrows went up a little as she gave me a puzzled glance. I moved to stand in front of her and set a folder down. The notarized amendments were within. The trail of emails, my father's letter, and the printed message, "It's yours when you're ready." In accordance with the 2011 revision to the Founding Trust, I am using my legal right to reassume the 51% controlling interest in Borealis House, I declared. Don't be theatrical. Don't raise your voice. Only the law. Oliver's expression had turned pale. "This is ridiculous. The document in question was, I said, suppressed." "Indeed, I am aware." The folder was opened by Judge Crane. She perused the papers, her lips pursed. "Mr. Hemsworth, is that your signature?" She tapped the printed email Oliver had forwarded and inquired in a low voice. He didn't respond. He simply shifted in his chair as if someone had shouted out to him in class. She added, "The board has functioned under the presumption that your mother had primary stewardship." I remarked, "My mother never had legal control. She simply ensured that nobody else did." To my left, a man who I believe was named Greg cleared his throat. "Will you be dissolving the foundation?" "No," I answered. "I'm going to respect it, put it back, and realign its leadership with the values it was built on," I said after allowing the stillness to settle. At that moment, Oliver stood up and spoke up. "You haven't visited this place. You have no idea what we have constructed, what we have done." I remarked, "You created a photo opportunity. I created programs, systems, individuals." He squinted his eyes. "You're acting sentimentally. The term they constantly used to undo me was there. Not this time, though." I took out my compass from within my tote, held it up. "This is what Dad gave me," I remarked quietly. "No title, no plaque. However, a conviction that carrying out the task is more significant than getting noticed for it." I put the compass on the table after moving to the middle of the space. The light danced across its scuffed brass face. "That's the reason I'm here, not to exact revenge, for the purpose of restoration." The board muttered. "You'll have to submit a formal vote request," said Judge Crane, turning to face me. "The amendment will be examined. Verify signatures. They are real," I declared. "But I'll hold off." Slowly she nodded. "Do you know what would happen if the vote were to pass?" "Yes," I said. "The people who built the house get it back." Oliver's lips parted, but nothing emerged. He didn't yell. He didn't storm. He simply took a seat, deflated, since he was aware. They all did. Winning the room wasn't necessary. It had already been the truth. Early snow had turned the sky pale outside. The perfume of pine and wood smoke, which was reminiscent of Decembers before our family became a household name, was borne by the wind. As I left the porch, I passed the cherry blossom tree and the stone benches that were never used again. My phone buzzed at that point. Judge Crane sent the email. Subject carried motion. I owned Borealis House, not through conquest, however by right. When I opened the entrance of the cottage, the last of the winter light was disappearing behind Norwich's steeples. As usual, it creaked. When I was younger, I used to find that ancient sound, wind-worn frame, worn hinges annoying. It was like an exhale now, as if the home knew who I was. Nestled in the edge of the woods just behind the Borealis campus, it had been abandoned for nearly a decade. It was mine in a technical sense. In the same letter that contained the amending paperwork, my father left it to me, but it was never delivered. A little space with a fireplace that sputtered more than it burned, and moss growing on the roof. It was home, though. Actual house. I entered and placed my suitcase next to the antique armchair where Dad once read. There was a subtle scent of dust and cedar, along with something sweeter, perhaps remembrance. Watching the sky turn from violet to ash, I took off my coat and went to the window. I have no messages on my phone. My mother has stopped leaving voicemails. Oliver did not make any press announcements. No desperate attempts at spin. I only made one public comment once the board vote was approved, and the ownership was formally transferred. Borealis House will now be guided by healing in practice, rather than legacy for looks. We go back to our original goal of uplifting people who were told their voices were too little to make a difference. That was it. No interviews, no calls for viral content, no revenge. Just some clarity, the authentic sort. Mara emailed 1 week later. A brief one. Don't apologize. Simply put, I had no idea it went that far. I wish you tranquility. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. However, some wounds are too old to be reopened merely out of courtesy. When no one is around, forgiveness develops like a garden. However, some soils are too toxic to be planted in again. I received a letter from a girl named Serena 3 days ago. She was the daughter of one of the first customers of Borealis, a woman Dad had rescued from a hazardous job many years prior. Serena was now a college student, learning about nonprofit law. She desired to work as my intern. She wrote, "Until this year, I was unaware of your name. However, my mother always claimed that the reserved Hemsworth was the one who saved her. I aspire to emulate her." When I read that, I started crying. Not the sobbing of broken hearts. The kind that brings out a side of you that has been suppressed for years by shame and quiet. I packed up a tiny box of items from the boardroom and dropped them off at the Foundation's archive early the following morning. The compass is one of these. Not because I no longer needed it, but rather because it might be useful to someone else. I taped the following note to the bottom. You're not lost if you feel that way. All you're doing is recalling your own path back. When I got back to the cottage, I gradually rebuilt. By the fence, I planted lavender. A fire was lit and eventually caught. Called Hannah at college and filled her in on everything. She sobbed. A writing retreat space she had been holding for someone who needed it more was then extended to me. I accepted it, not to get away. But first, I posted an article on Medium last week. It's only a little essay. It began with the title, "The Sound of Being Removed." Sometimes the instant they erase you, you don't hear. It is silent. A seat that was not extended to you. A retelling of a narrative without your identity. A smile that escapes your lips. However, occasionally, if you have the courage, you take control of the narrative and create your own conclusion. It has received close to 200,000 shares. And the note I received from a stranger yesterday is more important than all of that. I appreciate you proving to me that giving up is not a sign of failure. Flight is what it is. I was standing behind Borealis House today at the edge of the woods. Someone had polished the stone underneath the cherry blossom tree, which had lost its leaves. The plaque that had my line on it had been replaced. Where silence ends, hope begins. Not much fanfare, no mention of social media, only restoration. Perfect. I passed Gloria, the administrative volunteer who assisted me in opening that initial file, as I turned to go. In reference to the compass now visible in the front glass case, she nodded. She remarked, "I always thought you'd come back." "But not in this manner," I answered. "Neither did I." But perhaps this was the way all along. I then made my way home on foot. Not a bag, no storm, only me, dot complete, visible, enough. I didn't return to San Francisco. I didn't have to. I created something fresh instead. We dubbed it the Compass Initiative, a program within Borealis for women recuperating from emotional erasure, those who had been fired under the pretext of culture fit, abandoned by their own families, or dumped from marriages. Because you aren't given instructions, it is something you can recall, and now I recall, not who I claimed to be. But before they taught me to vanish, I was always who I was. If they had attempted to grin and erase you, how would you have responded? If you have ever left a family or job that made you shrink, please share your story in the comments section. To get back what was rightfully mine, I didn't have to speak loudly. I just told it like it was, and let it speak louder than any retaliation could. Some injuries don't require compensation. All they have to do is be seen. It no longer matters that some people will never apologize. Because the moment you stop seeking for approval to be entire healing starts. I appreciate you listening all the way through if you're still here. Tell someone else who is learning how to heal if this story resonated with you. And think about subscribing if you want to continue traveling with stories like these, true, strong, and quiet. Maybe you'll get the next one.